The link to the story will be in the description. Dining with Divinity by Soul Reaper Crew.
Heart XVL. Well, this is uncomfortable, Melano muttered beneath her breath, staring at the forms of her father and her grandfather as they steadily picked themselves up. At first, the surprise of what just happened was all over their faces. One moment they were in each other's faces, a fight potentially about to break out between the two brothers. Before they knew it, a flash of gold took over their sense of vision and felt a hand push them away with such force that neither had time to prepare for it. The pair remained with their eyes locked on Naruto, even after he threatened to beat them to a pulp if they made Hestia cry. Not many would dare say those words to either of them, let alone both. He must have had balls made of celestial bronze. Flashes of rage would dance across the features of the god of the underworld and god of the sky. To Naruto's credit, he didn't back down, nor did he hide away. He stood there, unflinching in front of Hestia. It was almost as if he was protecting her from what might, or could happen. You would dare? Both gods asked, though glared at one another for copying the other. Yes, I would, Naruto replied, not backing down from the pair as the sky outside darkened and the shadows in the room thickened. If you two want to fight, do it somewhere else. You don't come here and start tearing everything down. Not to mention, I won't let you upset Hestia. Not on my watch. Beside him, Hestia let out a sigh and left her chair to stand beside Naruto, who placed a hand on her shoulder. The goddess of ghosts couldn't help but notice the irked looks on Hades' and Zeus' face from the action. It was certainly surprising to see Hestia allow another man to touch her in such form. Are you two done? Everyone noticed the steel in Hestia's voice, and Melano could already tell by the rise in temperature in the room that her divine power was leaking out more than usual. The older goddess's eyes lit up into two tiny fireballs, glancing too between her younger siblings as if they'd stolen cookies from a jar that said do not touch. The pair of you can't make anything simple, can you? Today is not about fighting, nor airing out your dirty laundry with each other. Both gods straightened their jackets, with Zeus fixing his tie and Hades his collar before walking back towards them. Both brothers had their eyes focused on Naruto, who merely glanced back at them in calm. The blonde felt annoyed, though didn't try to convey it too much. He was telling the truth, though, when he promised to make them sorry if they made Hestia cry. He could tolerate a lot of things, but seeing his dear and cherished friend upset because her idiot brothers were having a hissy fit with each other was not one of them. If they wanted to start a fight, Naruto promised to be the one that finished it. They were lucky all he did was knock them to the other side of the room. Maybe what it took was sending them on a one-way trip to opposite ends of the city. Now, there was an idea. You need to explain yourself, Hestia, Zeus told her. His voice was quiet, but the seriousness of his words was evident for all to hear. Who is this man? Better yet, why is he here with my daughter, of whom I still want to understand why she is in New York in the first place? Electricity crackled around Zeus's hands. Watching quietly, Melano gulped at the action, wishing to be anywhere else but here. Or perhaps I should ask, what is he? No mortal should have the power to do what he just did. The goddess took a deep breath. Everything will be made clear, Hestia replied, but first you must promise me that there will be no more outbursts or fighting. I did not bring you here to start a fight. She turned to Hades, who'd remained silent throughout the exchange. I want the same from you, Hades. A TSK sound came out from the god, of which Hestia heard. Excuse me? Do you have something you wish to say to me, Hades? In a rare act of defiance, Hestia marched up to Hades and looked up at him, caring little for the height difference. Hades, despite his infamy, had the decency to look worried. Hades glanced down at her, then to Naruto, then to Zeus, before resting back on Hestia. No, I have nothing else to say. I will behave. His expression morphed back into a mask of composure, internally scolding himself for letting Zeus's words get to him. Don't act so rash, you fool. Thank you, brother, Hestia said to him, before turning back to their younger brother. Zeus, for the love I have for you, sister, I will agree. But I want answers. His steely gaze said it all. His love for Hestia was pushing his pride and anger away, though for how long, anyone could guess. All it would take was a flick of a wrist, and everything nearby would become a war zone. And you'll get them. That I can promise you. She looked back over to Naruto. Could you finish the drinks and snacks, Naruto? The blonde nodded. Of course. I'll be back in a few minutes. He gave one last look to the pair of gods watching him before slipping back to the kitchen, mumbling something beneath his breath. Just so you both know, if you try anything like this again, I'm willing to take extreme measures to bring you both to heel. She showed off a bracelet sitting comfortably on her wrist, with a jewel sitting in the middle. To the horror of both Zeus and Hades, they watched the jewel glow purple. I will call her, if necessary. In an instant, both Zeus and Hades appeared to settle down at the threat, though threw one last glare their way. Afterwards, the two returned to their seats in silence, trying to look anywhere but at each other. Feeling the situation had been diffused for the time being, Hestia sighed and returned to her seat. Okay, Hestia, next time, start with that threat. If she followed through with it, she was sure neither god would dare pipe up. Being the eldest of 6 siblings could be such a pain sometimes. Maybe she needed a vacation? Some isolated beach somewhere would be nice. And some of those drinks with the little umbrellas. They sat in silence for the better part of 5 minutes, which felt like the longest and most awkward 5 minutes of Melino's life. I wonder if Cerberus would jump out a hole in the ground, swallow me, and then take me back down with him. Anything's better than the tension around this table. How did Hestia stand it? Then again, Hestia had to place peacekeepers every time members of their family came into conflict. Looking at her from the corner of her eye, the goddess remained composed. A smile rested on her face, though she noted how her eyes were still resembling 2 fireballs. Zeus and Hades. Zeus and Hera Artemis and Aphrodite Ares and Hephaestus Hades and Demeter, they were the most dysfunctional family in the world, and that named a few of the quarrels. People wondered why she kept to herself in the underworld. Anything was better than being stuck in this mess. I'm starting to think I should have left all this alone. What felt like the longest 5 minutes in the world, all 4 deities heard the door swing open and watched as the blonde owner appeared with a tray in hand. Naruto could sense the tension in the room, but pushed it aside and wore his usual smile, appearing next to Hestia. Sorry to keep you waiting, Tia. 1 peppermint tea. Thank you, Naruto. Next came Melino. If I remember rightly, it was a coffee with 2 sugars and cream. He lowered the drink down on the table, with Melino quickly cupping it between her hands. She gave him a small nod. That's right. Thank you, she said quietly. She watched him move to her father next, and inwardly applauded him for appearing so calm. And for Mr. Underhill, Naruto said, staring at Hades and hearing the annoyance laced in his hum as he used his alias name. Hestia appeared amused, though Zeus let out a snort, which drew the ire of Hades, who sent him a quick glare. 1 amaretto coffee. Thank you. 2 words were all Hades said, before falling back into silence. Finally, for Mr. King himself, Zeus, 2 pairs of blue eyes looked at one another. Hestia informed me before today that you like to drink, so I hope this is to your taste. He lowered the final mug onto the table, and a strong scent of spiced pumpkin went across his sense of smell. The king of Olympus couldn't deny it smelled good. Despite his inner pride feeling wounded from the man's earlier shot on him, he pushed it down as deep as he could as he remembered his promise to Hestia. Like Hades, he gave a quick thanks before taking the mug into one hand and bringing it up to his lips. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he couldn't deny the second the drink touched his lips, his eyes marginally widened. It was good. Very good. Some cafes tended to make the pumpkin spice too weak or too strong. Here, it was a perfect balance. He didn't feel the need to scrunch up his face. I'll give that to him. He knows how to make a good drink. It's a good thing he made a lot of these now that there's more of us than I thought. Naruto told everyone and lowered a large plate of baked delicacies into the middle of the table. Everyone, including Zeus and Hades, leaned over to get a good look. Zeus, in particular, zeroed in on the lemon slices that sat to one side. Next to them were slices of angel cake and rolls of Battenberg. Each one looked as good as the last. It's almost like someone told him how much I enjoy lemon slices, he thought, and looked at his smiling sister from the corner of his eye. Hestia always did know how to butter him up and keep him happy. Some movement came from the side and noticed Naruto pulling over a chair and took the spot next to Hestia. A frown wove its way onto his face, as well as Hades. Neither appeared to like the idea of another male sitting so close to their elder sister. "So, you guys have questions?" Naruto replied calmly, looking at everyone sitting around the table. "I'll fill in as many blanks as I can." It took no longer than a second before Hades managed to beat his brother and daughter to the punch. "How are you alive? Your kind were wiped out years ago during the Great Shift. No one could have survived." To the point and blunt. Hades wasn't leaving any room for backtracking. Though irritated he didn't get the first question, Zeus remained silent, wishing for an answer too, while stuffing his face with a lemon cake. That's good. Yeah, I figured that might be your first question," Naruto replied, scratching the back of his head and chuckling. "Honestly, I'm not sure myself how I survived it, though I suspect Gia likely played a part in that too." The hairs on the arms of the deities stood on end at hearing the Earth Mother's names. Even Hestia, who knew the story, never got over the feeling. "Gia," Zeus stopped himself from grabbing another lemon slice. "What does our grandmother have to do with you?" The blonde shinobi stared back at Zeus, a seriousness in his eyes that stood firmer than the ones he showed earlier. "She has everything to do with me." He reached over to the table next to them and grabbed a knife from the top. Everyone watched as he slowly dragged the edge across his palm, showing no pain as the metal tore the skin apart. Afterwards, he placed it back on the table and held his palm up for everyone to see. What they saw wasn't blood, but instead the golden ichor of the gods. Immortality. Naruto Uzumaki was immortal. "You're immortal," Zeus stated as a fact. Rather than a question, "Are you telling us Gaia made you immortal?" "I am." Zeus's nostrils flared. Immortality was a precious privilege. It was a power all Olympians had, but rarely used. To make someone who was immortal, the god had to willingly part with a small piece of their divine power, hence why it was a rarity on Olympus. Indeed, the last person made immortal by the gods was millennia ago. It simply wasn't something that happened anymore. Zeus was king, and Gia had no right to create another. Her actions had enough consequences on Olympus. They didn't need to add one more to the mix. Why? Why would she give you that gift? To his Hades and Milono's surprise, the blonde scoffed and leaned back in his chair. "It's not a gift, it's a curse. I didn't choose eternal life. She gave it to me forcefully." His voice was bitter. "She doesn't care for what others want, only her own ideals and desires." "You still haven't told us what you are?" Zeus asked, digging further into the mystery that was presenting itself. He got an answer, though it wasn't from Naruto. "He's a golden man, Lord Grandfather," Melano said quietly, drawing the attention of everyone else. Zeus's eyebrows shot straight up, looking back and forth between his granddaughter and Naruto, a shinobi of the old era that predates the Olympians and Olympus, the ones that were given life by Mother Earth. She didn't want to say the primordial's name. Names had power, and she didn't want to draw any attention to herself. An array of emotions wept over Zeus's face, though his eyes went wide as he looked at Naruto. Of course, he was aware of the Golden Generation, but to think that one was still alive after so many millennia was unthinkable. He tried to put words together, but nothing was coming out of his mouth. His mind was rampant with thoughts, some negative and fewer positive. "You shouldn't exist," Zeus told Naruto point blank. "The time of the Golden Men died before the end of the Titan War, and you should have gone down with it." "And I agree with that statement, and yet Gia chose to lump me with immortality whether I wanted it or not," Naruto replied. He felt a hand fall onto his wrist and gave Hestia a smile at her attempt to comfort him. "You said Gia gave you immortality by force, and it's something you didn't want," Melano asked, seemingly growing in confidence as the talk around the table became less about Zeus and Hades fighting and more about the mysterious blonde. "Can you tell us how your circumstances came to be?" The blonde shinobi turned to look at Hestia, who merely smiled at him back and rubbed her thumb against his skin. It was her way of telling him she was here for him, and he was grateful she was. He sighed. "To understand my circumstances, you have to go back years before the Great Shift happened. he told them, pushing his memory as far back as he could, back to when the Titans ruled. Unlike the people of today, my people wielded a power called chakra, a combination of physical energy and spiritual that, when blended, could allow us to perform feats that few could imagine. To prove his point, he put his two hands together, and everyone watched as bluish energy encompassed his body in a flicker of light. Instead of being warriors, we were known as shinobi or ninja, different than the ones today in the East, though not without similarities. Throughout a large portion of our time walking the earth, the clans of different families warred against each other for land, power, wealth. The usual cliché thing, until eventually they came together and started forming villages. When this happened, the Titans took notice. Zeus and Hades and even Hestia straightened in their seats. How so? Understand, I wasn't born yet, so everything I know was handed down to me later in life. Naruto explained, but through history, the Titans kept an eye on us. When my village, Kanagakur, or the village hidden in the leaves came to fruition, Kronos sent his two strongest warriors to investigate and put a stop to it. Hyperion and Atlas. Zeus growled out the names of the two Titans. The two Titans had been a thorn in the Olympian side throughout the war between the two factions. Atlas, the Titan of endurance and strength, developed a rivalry of sorts with him. He always sought out the youngest son of Kronos when entering the battlefield, and the pair had some mighty battles throughout it. Hyperion was equally as formidable, and the closest in sadistic tendencies to the Olympian's father. Yeah, those two. Naruto scratched the back of his head, moving his neck from side to side, feeling some kinks building up. What I do know is they were defeated and sent running by the founders of the Leaf Village, who stopped their advancement. Hashirama Senju and Madara Uchiha. The names meant little to Zeus and Hades. However, they took note that two men of the Golden Age were able to defeat a pair of all-powerful titans like Hyperion and Atlas. On a good day, they would hard-press the likes of themselves and their brothers and sisters. They could likely take down some of the younger Olympians and the rest of the minor gods a part of their pantheon. Atlas was second only to Kronos, with Hyperion not far behind. How can mortals have power equivalent to the likes of titans? The very idea of it is unthinkable. Zeus said aloud. It didn't seem possible in his mind. Mortals could grow, but surely they couldn't get to that height of power. Madara Uchiha and Hashirama Senju were recognized as two of the strongest to exist. Their lineage makes their chakra and body stronger. That whole business is another story in itself, so I'll leave that for another time. Naruto told them, before continuing. The stuff with Kagaya and the sage could wait for another day. Either way, afterwards Hashirama recognized the threat these entities could possess, and thus made sure that every Hokage that came after him knew of their existence. He didn't want the rest of the world to know, to avoid a panic. Hestia nodded in agreement. Smart. I don't think any mortal would want to know that a group of all-powerful immortals are out there, and could try and destroy their homes in a moment's notice. It was why the pantheons of the world, including Olympus, didn't come out to humanity. The minds of most mortals wouldn't be able to handle such information, and panic would spread through the world. It would cause more harm than good. Then what? Melano asked, urging him to continue. Hades remained silent, listening intently to Naruto's words. Life continued after the encounter. Villages across the elemental nations, the name we gave the supercontinent, came to be. Konoha was built in the land of fire, and became known as the strongest of the 5 major villages. The leader of the Leaf was known as the Hokage. In this case, that was Hashirama Senju. For decades, we were in and out of a war, with each village vying for supremacy over the other. By the time of the 4th Shinobi War, the 5 major hidden villages finally put aside their differences to fight a common enemy. Afterwards, we all decided it was time to let old grudges lie. He smiled, thinking back to the days the 5 Kages got together to keep the peace. Many years after the war ended, it was my time to lead the Leaf Village. Hades leaned forward, finally speaking after remaining silent since the start. You were one of these Hokage? Naruto grinned, and patted his chest. I sure was. I was known as the 7th Hokage. My teacher, Kakashi-sensei, was the 6th Hokage, and my dad was the 4th. He laughed and rubbed the back of his head. I guess you could say I was bound to get it eventually. That's all well and good. Everyone heard, and turned to look at Zeus, who had his arms crossed over his chest. But you have yet to explain where the Earth Mother comes into all this. I know, I'm getting there, the blonde reasoned, putting his hands up. Patience is a virtue, brother. There's no need to rush. Hestia added, giving her brother a knowing look. I think he's getting to the main part of the story. She already knew the story, having learned it all from him millennia ago, but it had been some time since she heard it from the shinobi's mouth. Grabbing a lemon slice and breaking off a piece to put in her mouth, she motioned for Naruto to continue. Her brother could only grunt, but remained silent as Naruto continued. It was during my 5th year as Hokage when it happened. I remember meeting her to this day. The image of a dark-haired woman appeared in his mind. I was training when I first saw her. I was there for about an hour when the next thing I know, I hear a woman crying. There shouldn't have been anyone else on the training field, and I would have sensed someone approaching. She just appeared. I walk a little ways off into the trees a small ways away from the field, and there I find a woman in dark robes sitting under a large tree. She's crouched down with her knees tucked against her chest, with her hands covering her face. I've never seen her before in my life. Reaching over the table, Naruto picked up a slice of angel cake, breaking a piece off and threw it in his mouth. So, I go over to talk to her, and we start talking. It takes a few minutes cause she's in such a state, but eventually she opens up and tells me she's having problems with her family. They're fighting with each other, and she doesn't know what to do. He looked over at Zeus, and then to Hades. I should point out, I have no idea who she is or what she is. She hid her energy to appear like a mortal. Immortals, such as ourselves, are known to do that when we traverse through the mortal world. Hades said, with the other deities each nodding in agreement, though we typically keep a sliver of our power active in the chance something happens. Mortals around us would begin to be affected by the aura our power gives off. Though Gia is different in that retrospect. Zeus added, she is a primordial entity. Her power is next to impossible to read. It's like a sea with no bottom. Her literal body is the very ground we walk on. She's always connected to it. If she chooses to walk amongst mortals, she can switch the connection off like a light switch in a mortal home, and vice versa. She can hide even from us. Then what happened? Melano asked. Pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place. I gave her an ear, and we talked. We spoke for hours underneath that tree. I help her how best I can, and we begin to trade information and stories. I assumed she was from the Leaf Village, a civilian. I can't sense any hint of negative feelings coming from her. He looked back at everyone. That's something I can do. I can sense the negative feelings coming off someone. Useful. Very useful. Afterwards, we went our separate ways, and I didn't think much of it. As far as I saw it, I helped someone out. He explained, picturing the memory in his mind. A week later, she reappears. This time, waiting for me at the edge of the training field. This continues for 2 months. 2 months. Yeah. The blonde nodded. Every time we talk about all kinds of things. Our families, our goals in life. Konoha. We don't leave any stone unturned. In a way, I think we became friends. At least, that's what I believed. His fist clenched against the table, throwing another piece of angel cake in his mouth. I tell my wife, Hinata, about her, and she thinks she must feel lonely with all the chaos going on. I tell her all about our conversations when I come home. She tells me I should invite her over for dinner one evening. Let her be around a loving family. The novelty of his words wasn't lost on anyone. The next time I saw her, that's when everything changed. Everyone around the table straightened their backs, paying attention very closely. It started like any other day. The sun was out without a cloud in the sky. There was a gentle breeze grazing against your skin. You couldn't have asked for a better day. He remembered that day like the back of his hand. It didn't matter how quickly the years passed. That day would forever remain fresh in his memory. I made my way to my usual training field, knowing I likely wouldn't get anything done. As expected, there she was. The same dark robe with her dark hair running down her back. This time, though, something was different with her eyes. She looked determined, almost stone-faced. I asked her if everything was okay, and that's when it happened. She spilt the beans on who she was. On everything. He took a long, drawn-out breath. I'd never been in the presence of a goddess before. At least, not a real one anyway. His foot tapped beneath the table against the floor. Gia, she told me her name was, and that she was the mother to all. The creator of humanity. The mother to the Titans. The first true god. She explained the family drama, as her children were in a war with their children, her grandchildren, and that they were trying to take over and lay claim to the world. The Titanomachy. The children of the Titan King looked at one another with Hades speaking up. This means Gia was truly awake during it all. I always thought she was in a state of slumber during our war with the Titans. When the shift happened, I believed it was her creating a new landscape for a new era. A clean slate. Hestia nodded. That's what we all believed. Sadly, that was not the case. Naruto shook his head. It wasn't. What did she want from you? Zeus asked, his blue eyes staring intently into Naruto. Why would the Earth Mother go to all that trouble? The god of the sky has remained quiet for the most part as he listened to the story. Questions formed in his mind. She wanted me to enter the war under the banner of children and fight off the invaders that sought to take their home from them. 3 sets of eyes widened at the declaration. While Hestia merely nodded sadly to his side, she wanted me to come to fight for the Titans and help destroy the Olympian gods. The hairs on the blonde's arms stood on end, a feeling of static in the air as he looked over at Zeus. The king of Olympus didn't appear to like that piece of information. And you said no, right? Melano questioned. A piece of lemon cake dangled from the side of her mouth. The blonde gave a half smile. Well, I'll put it this way. You guys won, didn't you? And the Titans are the ones locked away. This time, Hades asked the question. Then why did you say no? Why would I bring my people, who have fought 4 wars up to that point, into a war they have no place in? Naruto reasoned. The 4th Shinobi War had been terrible, but it was the event that ultimately led to the 5 great villages uniting as one and putting aside their differences. Dragging the shinobi world into another war, this time against literal gods and monsters, would have spelt the death of thousands, if not more. The cycle of peace they'd create would be in tatters, and it would fall to him as the one who destroyed it. So I told her no, and inadvertently sealed the fate of my people. There was a heavy air around the table, and the blonde felt Hestia's knee beneath the table gently nudge against his own. She knew they were getting to the climax of the story, and wanted her friend to know she was still there with him. The gesture wasn't lost on Naruto, and smiled his thanks. That's when Gia showed me who she really was. It was like she'd wore a mask, and my answer caused her to throw that mask away and show her true colors and intent. Turns out, he looked at Hades and Zeus. Mother Earth doesn't enjoy being told no. Zeus snorted. I could have told you that. Where do you think old Thunderbreath over there gets it from? Hades added, earning a growl and a glare from his younger sibling. Boys, you've been doing so well. Hestia sighed, massaging her forehead. Please don't ruin it. Hade let out a low hum, but apologized. Sorry, Hestia. He looked back at Zeus and found the god of the sky gently itching the side of his eye, his middle finger clearly on display. The elder narrowed his eyes back but didn't react. After that, it felt like a cold chill ran up my spine, and the ground beneath me began to shift. Naruto could picture himself on that training field, the Earth Mother standing just feet from him. I remember this look on her face. It was this mixture of anger, sadness, and resolve. She started shouting at me how ungrateful we were, and that my rejection of her plea cemented that it was a mistake to create us all those years ago. If we wouldn't help the one that made us, then we would be shown how easy it would be to wipe the world clean. The Great Shift, the 4 deities all said. The Great Shift, he confirmed. It was like the whole world was getting turned upside down, as if we were in a snow globe being shaken around from side to side. I told her to stop what she was doing and put my hands on her shoulders, only to watch as her body crumbled into dirt and leaves. The screaming came next. Buildings across Konoha started to give way as the tremors got stronger. The blonde's expression turned pained. I could feel my wife and my children in our home. I could feel their fear. No one around the table said anything, letting Naruto come to the end of his story. The next thing I knew, I felt weightless. The ground beneath me swallowed me up, and all I remember is falling to infinite darkness. I used every drop of power I had to push myself back to the surface, but every time I thought I saw a needle of light above me, I felt myself being crushed beneath the endless weight of her body, pushing me back down further. I'm not sure how long I was crawling through dirt, but it felt like days, maybe weeks. He could still feel the walls of dirt and soil pushing against him on all sides. I begged to die, and I guess Gia heard me and had different plans for me. Instead, I felt a surge of power like nothing I'd ever felt cocoon around me. Before I knew what was happening, my body got pushed out of the earth, as if reborn from the dirt. Naruto released a sigh. I saw the devastation with my own 2 eyes. In no time at all, my people were gone. My wife, my friends, the people I swore to protect, all gone without a trace. I am the last of my kind, and I've wandered the world for millennia, seen all the ages, and come out the other side, all the same. He put his hands together. That's my story. Along the way, I met Hestia. He gently nudged his friend with his elbow, making the dark-haired goddess smile. That's a lot of information to take in. Both Zeus and Hades massaged their foreheads. Melano, to her credit, took it in her stride, munching away on the final lemon slice. She'd managed to grab it before the god of the sky could lay claim to it. She was going to need a refill of her drink too. Luckily for her, she wasn't the only one, and Naruto was quick to notice. Looks like you guys are out of drinks. Do you all want a refill while you digest everything I told you? I need to check on Talia, too. Hades and Hestia both nodded their thanks, though Zeus frowned as he watched his cup taken away. We still need to discuss my daughter after this. Of course. The moment Naruto disappeared, the 4 gods began to discuss, quickly being led by Zeus. I don't like it. Hades snorted. There's a shocker. The god of the underworld would be more surprised if Zeus winked at the blonde and gave him a thumbs up. However, he couldn't deny he was a little unsettled at everything they just learned. Though, I can't say I'm happy about it, too. If he's been alive for as long as he's telling us, why didn't he reveal himself sooner? That's what I'm saying. For once, the pair were in agreement with each other. Naruto's presence was unsettling at best. He was strong. Not just anyone could separate them the way he did by forcing them away from one another. Many of the other Olympians would dare get between them, other than Poseidon or possibly Hera. Zeus's electric blue eyes stared over at his sister. You two appear friendly with each other. You've known one another for a long time. Hestia nodded. A very long time. We met 10 years after the Titanomachy ended, and we've been friends ever since. Outside of our family, my strongest relationship is with Naruto. And the 2 of you are just friends? Hestia's eyes narrowed. What are you insinuating? Her eyes lit up like fireballs once more. She didn't like what Zeus was trying to imply. Gulping at Hestia's obvious annoyance from the question, Zeus steeled his nerves. It's as I said. Your friendship has never evolved past that of friends. The fire in Hestia's eyes grew brighter. Don't get angry. It's a fair question. My relationship with Naruto is that of friendship. Do I love him? Yes, I do, but it's strictly platonic and vice versa. Naruto knows of my vow to never take a husband, to never sire children, and has always been respectful of that decision. She gave her brothers a pointed look. I don't need the 2 of you telling me who I can and can't spend my time with. Both nodded. Are we clear? Crystal, sister, you vouch for him then? You can vouch that he does not intend to harm Olympus. She rolled her eyes before voicing to Zeus. If he wanted to harm Olympus, he would have done it millennia ago. The idea that the blonde would wage war with the Olympians was laughable. He didn't care about such things, and he didn't hold the pride or pettiness to do so. He disliked war in all forms. He stayed under the radar because he wanted to. Not all of us like being the center of attention. The king of Olympus grunted, but conceded her to her point. Besides, look how many of our family have visited this place and spoken so highly of him. Apollo, Hermes, Aphrodite, Persephone, she gestured to Hades, our brother, Hebe, Triton, and we can't forget Athena and Artemis. It all started with her two nieces. Even Hera mentioned she wanted to visit at some point. Melano, once again remaining silent, felt the need to add, his family in Elysium also speak of him in the highest regard. Maybe a little biased, but it's worth noting. Why you saw my family? Melano nearly jumped out of her seat at Naruto's voice. Turning around, she looked up at the blonde, only to find a most vulnerable expression she'd seen on the man. Hope and a need to know more shone in his eyes. She nodded her head. I did. Who? Who did you see? Melano recounted who she met. Your wife, Hinata, and your two children. The blonde looked ready to crumble then and there, threatening to drop the tray balanced in his hands. Your parents were there too. Your sensei and godfather, along with the giant-chested Hokage woman with blonde hair. A heartfelt chuckle escaped his mouth. Grandma Tsunade, big-chested woman. Zeus and Hades asked simultaneously. The goddess of ghosts nodded and made a motion across her chest, bigger than Lady Demeter. Both gods looked surprised, given their sister was known to have the largest bust on Olympus, and enjoyed reminding people of that fact. Giant bazookas, I'm telling you. Zeus and Hades looked intrigued and turned to Naruto for confirmation, who merely shrugged back. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen someone bigger in this day and age. Naturally, anyway, the bust of the fifth Hokage was typically a topic forced on him by Jiraiya, who familiarized himself with every part of Tsunade's body, despite never having been with said woman. You don't say? Zeus replied, suddenly having the urge to make a trip down to the underworld. Even Hades, who loved Persephone more than anything, couldn't help but wonder if Melano's words were true. A cough brought them out of their thoughts, finding Hestia giving both of them an irritated expression and tapping one of her index fingers on the table. I'm sure Hera and Persephone would be pleased to know the two of you have taken a vested interest in another woman's breasts. The pair had the good decency to shake their heads. That won't be necessary, sister. Hades said back, what Hera doesn't know won't hurt her. She didn't appear convinced, but would let the matter slide for now. Turning back to Naruto, Hestia asked, Talia still napping? The blonde nodded. Yeah, she's out like a light. Cute little snores and all. The shinobi turned to face Zeus. I guess you'd like to know how Talia ended up with us now, huh? Yes, I would. The king insisted. Why is she in New York? And where is her mother? California, I'd imagine, Hestia replied, before the pair took it, in turn, to explain the story to Zeus and how Talia ended up with Naruto. To Zeus's credit, he didn't interrupt. He sat and listened to their tale, taking in the information with his daughter's face pictured in his mind. She appeared nervous around him when he entered the fox's den, but then again, she was only 4. Children at that age were typically shy around new people, and Talia was no exception. The last time he'd seen Talia was little more than a year ago. Despite what the other gods said about him, he did care for his children and their mortal mothers and tried to watch out for them whenever necessary and possible. Namely, to ensure Hera didn't try anything once she learned of their existence. Though justified in her anger, she could be capriciously cruel to his demigod children and their mortal parents. If she wanted to aim her hate at someone, he'd prefer she took it out on him. His child was innocent when it came to the mechanics of their creation. As he listened, he was unaware of his right hand holding his mug with a clenched fist. His knuckles steadily turned bone white as his annoyance grew. Damn it, Beryl. What were you thinking? When she walked out, I contacted Hestia, and we came up with a plan to inform you of what happened the day after your renewed vow to your wife. Naruto told him, with his hands were clasped together on the table. Hestia told me it was the best option given the good mood you'd be in. Zeus groaned and gave his sister a look. Hestia merely smiled back. Though things didn't go to plan, everyone looked at Hades and Melano. Oh, sorry for spoiling your top secret meeting. Hades feigned an apologetic tone, his expression betraying his words. Either way, that's everything. How I met Talia and why she has been with me. The blonde smiled. She's been a joy to be around. She made my home life a lot more colorful, that's for sure. And I've been checking on her regularly. I stop by a few times a week. I've developed a bit of a relationship with my dear niece. Hestia added, Stop by. You practically live at my home now. You have a room and everything. Naruto replied, and watched Hestia shrug her shoulders. The pair of brothers narrowed their eyes, though didn't say anything. So, Melino started looking across the table. Where do we go from here? What do we do? Her elders all looked at one another. They weren't sure either. Even Zeus was at a bit of a loss. This whole situation is rather troublesome, Hades admitted, scratching the back of his head and not noticing Naruto look away to contain a chuckle. The god of the underworld was sporting some Nara-like tendencies. We discovered far more than I imagined we would. He looked back over to Hestia, who met his gaze with her own. You trust this man with your life? Hestia didn't hesitate when she answered. I do. Hades hummed to himself, half nodding at the answer and closing his eyes. Everyone just watched him for a moment, wondering what was going through the head of God. The information churned around in his head. After a minute, he sighed and nodded again. I guess that's enough for me to know. It is. Hestia, Melino, and Zeus all said, while Naruto looked somewhat surprised. He wasn't sure what to expect from the god of the underworld, but he wasn't thinking Hades would make that decision so quickly. If Hestia trusts him, then I guess that'll be enough. For now, at least. He looked at Naruto. Could you get us some more of those lemon slices? Blinking a couple of times from surprise, the blonde jumped up. Sure. Naruto quickly whisked away into the kitchen to get more of the baked goods. You would trust him like that? The god of the sky had a skeptical look on his face and couldn't hide his incredulous tone. He had figured his brother would put up more of a fight. How could he be so trusting of a person with all the information they just learned? Hades leaned back in his chair. It's as I said. Our dear sister is a good judge of character. If she can put her faith in him and trust him, then I shall at least put my trust in her words. The god of the underworld smirked. Besides, I won't be leaving him idle to his devices. I will have someone keep an eye on him for a while, to ensure our sister's safety and his intentions are pure. I don't need a babysitter, brother. Hestia replied, though leaned forward. However, what do you mean? Coming out of the kitchen, Naruto appeared with another tray of lemon slices and angel cake, and placed it in the middle of the table. It's a good thing I made extras. What I mean is, Hades' hand rose in the air and came down to rest on an unsuspecting Melino's head. I will have Melino remain in the human world to keep an eye on him. Huh. The head of said goddess swiveled around to stare at her father, eyes wide. I am. What? No. The others, including Naruto, appeared surprised. You can't go around offering my services like that. Yes, I can. I'm your father and Lord. So what? Offer your own damn services. Not me. I think it's a lovely idea. It will be nice to see more of you, Melino. Hestia added, appearing pleased with the idea. She rarely got to see her niece. Seeing her today was a treat. For the sake of keeping the peace, I don't mind, Naruto told them, putting his hands behind his head and looking up at the ceiling. I've been thinking it could be time to hire a waitress or two. I could focus on the things in the kitchen that way. I wouldn't have to explain why there are multiple versions of myself running around back there. The three immortals blinked in surprise, while Hestia merely smiled at his words and drank her tea. There are more of you back there? For more. It's a technique I use a lot. The shadow clone jutsu. Sounds handy, Hades admitted, not appearing too bothered. Sounds like when we split our essence. Can we rewind, please? Do I not get a say in this? Melino shook in her chair with her hands running through her hair. She wasn't pleased in the slightest. Eventually, after another minute of hearing her name getting thrown around, the goddess of ghosts sunk in her hair and rested her forehead against the table. I've made a huge mistake. Smirking at his daughter as she accepted her fate, the rest of the trio looked over at Zeus, who'd remained quiet during the whole ordeal. The god of the sky was merely toying with his coffee mug and tapping the side with his fingers. Any thoughts, Zeus? It was Hestia who asked. It was rare for him to be so silent. The king of Olympus had plenty of thoughts, but he didn't know where to start. A powerful immortal that predated Olympus was sat in front of him and ran a cafe under his nose. Remaining hidden for millennia until now, Zeus couldn't help but feel trepidatious. Just because Hestia knew him and vouched for him, that didn't rule out the possibility that the blonde could be a grave threat to Olympus. Anyone who had a connection to Gia was a cause for concern. After all, look at what happened with the Titans and Typhon, and then the Giants many years later. He didn't want to invite more problems to Olympus's doorstep. However, all of the gods that visited the fox's den had expressed their delight, namely towards the owner. Impressing the likes of Artemis and Athena was impressive, as the pair were good at discerning when a threat was nearby. Not to mention his relationship with Hestia. He just wasn't sure. He wanted to blast the blonde into oblivion and be done with it all, but that wouldn't fly this time. Talia, Zeus mumbled out, "She's been well under your care." "She has," the blonde nodded. "The first couple of days were an adjustment, but having Hestia around helped. You've developed a soft spot for her." Zeus looked to his sister, who nodded at his question. "I have. I kept an eye on her as you asked when I could spare it. Sadly, I wasn't watching when Beryl decided to leave her, but I've been there since." This time, Zeus nodded, and for a moment fell silent. Despite what his brethren thought of him, he did care for his half-blood children. Although their lives were fleeting compared to the lives of his godly children, he did want their lives to be somewhat happy, however possible that was. That's why the children of the gods went to stay at Camp Half-Blood. In truth, I am unsure what to do. On one hand, your very existence could spell trouble for Olympus, an unchained anomaly with power that rivals the gods. Zeus was up front, though Naruto did not appear to take offense to his words. It was understandable, given his position as leader of his family. On the other hand, my daughter is in your care and appears healthy. Zeus rubbed his brow with his hand, briefly looking Hestia's way, and felt her dark brown eyes lingering on him. As Hades stated, "Hestia, vouching for you works in your favor. If it were not that, I would blast you into oblivion." "Somehow, I don't think that'll work," Hestia thought, but didn't voice it. "If," Zeus started to say, and looked at everyone around the table, "if I allow this to slide, and continue to allow my daughter to remain under your care with Hestia providing a watchful eye, can you guarantee her safety?" Naruto didn't hesitate for a moment before responding with, "I can. A few monsters have already tried, but I sent them packing." Zeus grunted, "Good. She will need to learn how to defend herself. If she's like my other demigods, some of her powers will start showing up sooner. I noticed since whenever she sneezes the electrical appliances at home go off." Zeus sighed. "I'm guessing it's a common one." "Very common." The king of Olympus sank back in his chair. "If things are to remain as they are, it will mean the other gods of my pantheon will be unable to visit here in the future. Hestia watching over Talia, while Melano keeps an eye on you, will draw enough attention. Having gods constantly flocking here is unwise and will later spell trouble in the long run. The rules I created millennia ago are for a reason." Naruto and Hestia looked at each other and nodded. "Yeah, Hestia warned me that might be the case." "Know this," Zeus looked Naruto square in the eye. "I might not be around, but that doesn't mean I won't be keeping a close eye on you as well. Your existence is unnerving, given how long you've gone unchecked. Your ties to Gia make that even more prevalent. The first sign of trouble, I'm taking Talia and sending her to Camp Half-Blood." Zeus let out a low huff, earning a roll of the eyes from Hades. "I might even have Chiron stop by your home and visit from time to time." Naruto wasn't looking to argue with the king of Olympus, and shrugged. "If that's what you want, then fine. Just know, I'll protect Talia from whoever I deem a threat to her life and happiness." This time, the blonde stared right back at Zeus, and I do mean everyone. Noted. A sigh of relief escaped Hestia, happy that overall the meeting succeeded. She tried to ignore the groan and complaints coming from Melano, who was still unhappy with being forced into playing the role of Naruto's babysitter for X amount of time. Well, it started rocky, but at least everything ended on a good note, she thought, and looked back at the bracelet sitting on her wrist. "I'm glad I didn't have to resort to the big guns. I fear Mother would have taken the opportunity to make Naruto sweat and critique his food." The Titaness never failed in making the blonde feel on edge. Her thoughts and one's conversations were quickly halted as an iris message started to form next to Zeus. Hestia motioned to Naruto, who was quick to disappear in the back. leaving the deities to deal with whoever was calling. Zeus! Zeus! What the hell is going on? Why were there thunder clouds encircling Manhattan? And why was the ground shaking? Oh, boy, everyone thought, as the concerned, yet annoyed visage of Hera appeared through the portal. Everything's fine, my love, Zeus reasoned, putting his hands in the air to show everything was fine. The goddess of marriage didn't appear convinced. She gave her husband a look while crossing her arms, causing the god of the sky to point across the table towards his elder brother. Said brother rolled his eyes, mouthing the word, coward, as the portal spun around and faced the god of the underworld. Instantly, Hera's face soured. Oh, you're here. Nice to see you too. Thrown any puppies off Olympus recently? Hades asked, staring at his younger sister with an emotionless gaze. Whether his words had any impact on Hera was debatable, as the woman had mastered the skill of keeping a neutral face. Though, she did turn her nose up at him and swish her hair to one side as the portal turned back to Zeus. Never mind. I think I can see what angered you. Just don't take out on the city. I wouldn't want to see Manhattan razed to the ground. She looked to Hestia. Please, keep them both in check, sister. I always do, Hestia replied. I'll return to my previous engagement. Do try and have a good time, husband. I'll try. Oh, Hera, before you go, I have a message for you. Once again, Hera turned to her elder brother. What? Everyone watched as Hades reached into his pocket, fumbling around for a brief moment before pulling out his hand. His fist was clenched, though his middle finger was riding high for everyone to see. You look fat in that dress. Before Hera could say anything, Hades snapped his fingers and forced the portal to disappear. The last image he saw was his sister's expression turning murderous before vanishing. Looking smug with himself, he looked to Hestia, who merely shook her head. Very mature. I hate you so much, Zeus muttered, glaring at Hades. No doubt Hera would be in a foul mood when he returned to Olympus, and he was the one who would have to deal with it. The god of the underworld merely smirked to himself, while mentally patting himself on the shoulder. Today turned out more fulfilling than he imagined. Part XVLL must stay awake, Zeus told himself, leaning against the back of his throne as he half listened to Athena. Said goddess was on her feet, dressed in a traditional Greek chiton that was once all the fashion back in ancient times, a long scroll in her hands that reached all the way to the floor. He loves his daughter, but she tended to take charge during solstice meetings and took it upon herself to air her grievances and list every tiny detail that was rattling around in her endless mind. The first couple of times it was cute, but now, millennia later, it was little more than exhausting to hear. Hence why he often left Athena's speech to last. Blue eyes drifting away from the goddess of wisdom. The whole room looked to be in the same state to himself, though some hid it better than others. Apollo and Hermes' posture was similar to his own, though at some point they sank further into their thrones with their legs spread out in front of them and shoulders dropping to the height of the armrests. Hermes even had the nerve to let out a yawn, briefly making his elder sister stop mid-sentence and direct a glare his way before continuing. Since she didn't summon her spear, he had to imagine she was close to finishing. His other sons weren't much better than the pair. Dionysus was already asleep and had been for some time. Maybe an hour, but that was nothing new. The youngest of his Olympian brood couldn't go an hour into the solstice meetings before falling asleep, which was why he had him as one of the first to speak on current affairs related to him. The god of wine was dressed still in his camp attire and clearly looked unhappy with the situation. Not that Zeus cared. His son had brought it upon himself. If he wanted someone to blame, all he needed to do was look in the mirror. Near Dionysus was Hephaestus, who now and again would look Athena's way to appear like he was paying attention. In reality, the god of the forge was tinkering away with some device, trying to hide it from his sister. Rubbing his face, his son was none the wiser to the oil smears across his face, flecks of metal glittering in his long and shaggy beard. Then again, maybe he didn't know but didn't care. The latter was most likely the case, though he would sneak glances at the goddess of love, who sat further down the line of thrones. Unsurprisingly, Aphrodite was paying no attention to Athena's speech, though Unlike her ex-husband, she didn't try to hide it. Sporting long blonde hair that ran down her back like a golden waterfall, the goddess of love decided it was a good time to paint her toenails. A small tube of hot pink nail polish sat perfectly on the edge of the armrest, her petite feet resting on the edge of her throne. A rare look of concentration was on her face as she ran the brush over the nails, giving Athena a deadpan expression when she felt the younger goddess's eyes on her. She even brushed off the glare Artemis was sending her way. Speaking of his daughter, Artemis was one of the few in the room who remained upright and appeared to be paying attention to her sister's speech. Like her sister, Artemis was dressed in a chiton like the old days, though silver instead of white. Her bow rested on the side of her throne along with her quiver of arrows at the ready. Sitting in her hand was a small knife, which she spun between her fingers. The glare she was sending towards the goddess of love and the look of defiance she got back made her toy with the weapon dangerously. Those two truly are each other's worst enemies, Zeus thought. He'd all but forbade them from getting in a fight with one another during the solstices. Despite Artemis being the superior fighter, Aphrodite was scrappy. She wasn't against using underhanded tactics to get the better of the moon goddess. The last time the pair got into a serious physical altercation, they broke San Francisco. The two were on thin ice for over a decade and weren't allowed back to the city ever. The rest of the gods in the throne room of Olympus weren't much better. Ares was staring up at the ceiling while one of his many knives, toying with it in his meaty hands. His eldest son and the god of war was as uninterested in the meeting as always. If the atmosphere was calm, he'd be the one to instigate a battle just for the hell of it. On more than one occasion, walked in to find Ares trapping one of his brothers in a headlock or full Nelson. Everyone knew it was Ares teaching Aphrodite holds to put Artemis in on the occasions they fought. He couldn't stop himself from shaking his head. Of all his children, Ares was the one that disappointed him the most. He and Hera spoiled their firstborn. What a mistake that had been. If they'd been firmer with him, maybe he would have turned out different. The last two of the Olympian pantheon, Hera and Demeter, sat beside one another, making idle chat as they waited for the meeting to end. Unlike his wife, whose dark hair tied into a neat braid down one side of her body, Demeter wore her long golden hair unimpeded. It flowed like a golden waterfall with straw and wheat woven in certain places. Her chiton, while conservative, was a light green color, showing enough skin to leave most men fawning over her. Demeter looks very beautiful today, he thought to himself, until quickly shaking those thoughts out of his head a moment later. He and Demeter had a long history with one another, given Persephone was their firstborn child to both of them. For the most part, they were on good terms, but now and again when autumn and winter set in and Persephone set off for the underworld, things got chilly between them. The king always felt it was best to give his older sister her space during those months, letting her fawn over her other immortal children as a distraction from her favorite. Speaking of his siblings, Aeon came from his right and spared a glance at his elder brother, the god of the sea. Like the rest of the gods, Poseidon had one hand resting against his face as he willed himself to stay awake. As always, he was wearing those ridiculous Hawaiian shirts he loved, along with a pair of flip-flops. The contrast in style between them couldn't be more different. Everything Zeus wore was stylish and smart and spoke volumes on where he was on the leadership hierarchy. Poseidon, meanwhile, looked like a beach bum who forgot to shave and spent his day fishing at the harbor. "Stop staring at me," Poseidon's voice muttered. Zeus noticed the sea-green eyes of his brother looking at him from the corner. "Stop yawning. Athena won't be much longer. Tell that to the rest of your brood. Most of the room looks half asleep already." Zeus grumbled, but couldn't fault his brother's words. Sitting upon his throne and straightening his back, the god of the sky let out a mighty clap as he brought his two hands together. For a split second, the room flashed with light as lightning danced across the sky around Olympus, and thunder boomed in their eardrums. The effect it had was instant. Apollo and Hermes both jumped in their thrones. Dionysus slid off his throne in surprise. Hera and Demeter's chat came to an end. Ares dropped his knife, nearly landing and piercing through his thigh. Hephaestus dropped his doohickey and grumbled to himself. Aphrodite missed her foot completely, smearing pink nail polish across her skin. Even Athena and Artemis were caught by surprise, with Athena fumbling her notes in her hands and Artemis bow clattering to the ground. The only one who wasn't surprised was Poseidon, who merely rolled his eyes and sank further into his throne. Need I remind you all, this is the summer solstice. I expect you all to pay attention when a member of this council is speaking. He narrowed his eyes predominantly over his children and Aphrodite, all of whom had the decency to gulp and make themselves look presentable. He turned and looked at Athena, who nodded to her. "Continue with your report, Athena." A small smile wove onto Athena's face. "Thank you, Father. However, I have just finished." The papers in her hands disappeared in a flash of golden light, teleporting back to her temple. Falling back on her throne, she smoothed down the front of her chiton and crossed her sandal-clad ankles over each other. She turned and glared at her brothers, having tried to ignore their lack of respect moments earlier. Your attention spans need work. Falling asleep in the middle of a council meeting is deplorable. You say that like you haven't done it, Hermes muttered, earning another glare from his older sister. I haven't. The god of the sun looked to his sister. You never get on Uncle P's case. He's just as bad. Don't drag me into this, Apollo. Poseidon scolded. The last thing the elder god wanted was getting dragged into his niece and nephew's war of words. Athena could grate on his nerves daily if he hadn't grown a tolerance to her barbed tongue. Ignoring her when she got high and mighty was the best option for his eternal sanity. Athena turned to her uncle, her gray eyes shining. I don't get on his case, Apollo, because I know a lost cause when I see one. Tilting his head in her direction, the god of the sea leveled his niece with a glare. She could be as annoying as his brother. Worse even once she got going. Centuries ago, he would snipe back at her, and the two would have fallen into another pointless argument. Now he settled for scratching his eye with his middle finger in full view for Athena to see. Watching her face scrunch up in annoyance was enough to make him half grin before turning away. All Zeus could do was sigh. I guess that's it for another year, Hera announced, standing up from her throne and rubbing her shoulders. Let's call it a day. I'm good with that. Same. Finally, I thought that was never going to end. One by one, his family got up from their thrones and began making their way towards the large set of golden doors. They formed small groups, with Athena and Artemis pairing together, while Hera and Demeter did the same. Aphrodite was whisking Ares away, whispering something in his ears that made the god of war grin like a maniac. Hephaestus trailed behind them, annoyance on his face, while Dionysus slinked away, knowing full well his destination was back to Camp Half-Blood. The only one who didn't move was Poseidon, who looked at him with a raised eyebrow. You've got that look on your face. What more is there? Again, the god of the sky let out a loud sigh. Moments later, he clapped his hand again to gain their attention. Lightning dancing across the sky with the sound of thunder booming into their ears. The action was enough for everyone to freeze their advancements and turn back to their king. We're not finished yet, Zeus announced, giving them all a poignant look. Take your seats. A loud groan came from his sons, with Hermes voicing his annoyance. Come on, Dad. Is it really that important? Can't it wait? No, it can't. But surely dash. Hermes didn't get to finish as lightning raced across the sky again and fell silent under Zeus's intense gaze. One by one, the Olympians on their feet dragged themselves back to their thrones, some of them flopping down with clear annoyance on their face. What's this all about, Zeus? He heard Hera ask as his wife returned to her throne next to him. A delicate eyebrow was raised, with her intense brown eyes looking into his blue ones. You did not mention anything about another announcement this morning at breakfast. The summer solstice was an all-afternoon affair. You'll understand why in a moment, he thought, before beginning to speak. It has come to my attention that in recent months, many of you have been frequenting a small cafe in the West Village, known as the Fox's Denver. Everyone in the room who's visited the establishment perked up, notably Athena and Artemis. Their curiosity instantly intensified, wondering what in the world their favorite spot in the city had to do with their meeting. What about it? Apollo asked, looking confused. Are we all going there after this meeting? 'Cause I'd be cool with that. Same here. Hermes popped up, as did a few of the others in the room. No, Apollo. We are not going to the Fox's Den after the summer solstice meeting. In fact, none of you will be returning to that place ever again, he announced, and watched as over half of the eyes in the room suddenly widened. As of today, the Fox's Den in the West Village of New York City is off limits to Olympus. The room went silent for a brief moment before a group of them jumped from their thrones in disbelief. What? You can't do that. That's not fair. My D&D group was planning another game day in 2 weeks. Where am I supposed to stop for coffee in the early hours of the morning on my delivery runs? How am I supposed to wrap these legs around that hunky body of his? Zeus groaned and tried to ignore the voice of Aphrodite, who was describing all the things she planned to do to the blonde. The goddess of love was none the wiser to the annoyed expression on Ares' face or the rolling of the eyes coming from her former husband. Apollo and Hermes were yammering endlessly, but when he looked at Artemis, he found the goddess of the moon was seething. Her face was flushing gold as the ichor rushed to her head from how angry she was. He knew she would be angry, but he'd never felt his youngest Olympian daughter glare at him with such anger before. The only one who wasn't speaking was Athena. Her gray eyes were speaking enough by the way she was gazing at him. Gods, this is troublesome. Husband, this is a most peculiar decree. Were we meant to visit this place next week? Hera asked, confusion written all over her face. The goddess of marriage had been looking forward to visiting the little cafe ever since word of mouth started reaching her ears. She finally found room in her busy schedule to make a lunch date for the two of them. Persephone and I were planning on going tomorrow. You've dashed our plans. Demeter chimed in. My little flower was looking forward to visiting. What am I supposed to tell her now? Not that I'm bothered by the announcement, Poseidon started. But is there a particular reason? It's a bit strange to bar us from going to a cafe. Granted, his brother could make the oddest laws and forbid them from doing some of the weirdest things, but this was a little strange even for him. The god of the sky grumbled, My daughter, Talia, has fallen under his care. Until she is ready to attend Camp Half-Blood, she will remain with him. Therefore, I'm barring this pantheon from having any communication with either of them. Silence quickly fell through the throne room, and unconsciously, all the eyes in the room drifted to the queen. Whatever expression she held a moment ago instantly vanished. A look so frosty and cold the oceans would have become a frozen wasteland was evident to everyone. Even Poseidon had the good decency to know it wasn't a good idea to poke the bear when she was angry. Father, you can't be serious, Artemis yelled, breaking the silence and continuing to glare at her father. Your demigods are powerful. A demigod with such a potent scent with a mortal with no training? Monsters will come for them constantly. It's a death sentence. I have to agree with Artemis. Athena finally spoke. To place young Talia with Naruto Uzumaki is foolish. Not to mention dangerous for both of the individuals. They're more at risk than ever before. It would make more sense to send Talia straight to the camp. Hermes frowned. For he's a little young, don't you think? There have been younger. It's a sad truth, but sometimes it's for the best. In this case, Talia should go to the camp. Chiron would watch over her, as would Dionysus. Athena turned and looked at her youngest Olympian brother, who again slipped asleep, losing interest in the conversation at hand. Well, maybe just Chiron. This matter is not up for discussion, Zeus declared, standing up from his throne and looking out across the room. If it makes you feel any better, no, I have charged Hestia with keeping an eye on them both. She is well acquainted with the owner and kind enough to watch over them. Our sister is acquainted with a mortal man. Poseidon asked, looking confused. He wasn't aware his sister had friends outside of their family circle. Yes, they have been well. Zeus scrunched up his face. Friends, for many millennia, apparently. Artemis and Athena looked ready to retort, but the words died in their mouths as Zeus's words sunk in. Similar looks wove onto the faces of the rest of the council. Millennia? What? Aphrodite asked, wondering if Zeus misspoke. The king smoothed down his jacket and tie. What do you mean they've known each other for millennia? He's what, 25? 30 at a push. She looked over at Athena and Artemis for confirmation, but the two goddesses were frowning too. They didn't know either. The topic of his age surprisingly never came up in their conversations. They always assumed he was no older than 30, given his appearance. Hermes and Apollo were shrugging too. They had no idea. Zeus ran a hand through his beard as he looked at the stumped expressions of his children. Naruto Uzumaki is not mortal. He's a relic from before Olympus. The last golden man left in existence. He's immortal, he announced, and watched the looks of disbelief run across the faces of his family. Even Hera momentarily dropped her frosty expression, glancing at her husband in wonder as she took in the information. His most intelligent child looked as if her brain was about to go into overload. "You can't be serious?" Poseidon replied, his tone of voice more serious. "A golden man? Surely you jest." "I'm not. Hestia was with me, and she confirmed everything he told us was true. Hades was there too, as was Melano." "Why were they there?" "Apparently, Melano discovered information about him before that day and informed her father. They turned up when we did, so they were part of the conversation." Zeus revealed, calling out back to the conversation. "Hades was unsettled by the revelation as I was, and commissioned Melano to watch over him as Hestia does. So that's why he was there," Hera muttered, not forgetting about the little insult her older brother threw her way that afternoon. Grumbling to herself, she was still trying to think of a way to get back at the walking corpse she called a sibling. The gloomy idiot ruined her day. There was also the fact that Zeus's illegitimate spawn was now living in New York for the foreseeable future. At least, with the girl in California, she was far from Olympus. Now, she was on their doorstep. It was less than ideal. "Hold on, let's rewind," Artemis announced, still trying to absorb the information and process it accordingly, though appeared to handle it better than her older sister. "Are you telling me Naruto isn't a mortal who makes delicious baked goods?" Everyone gave her a flat expression, "but an immortal who comes from an era that predates us." "Yes, that's right. And Aunt Hestia has known about it all along." "Again, yes. According to Hestia, the two are," Zeus looked pained to say the next word, "besties." Poseidon didn't look pleased by the news either, a frown settling in on his face. The following noise to come out from his daughter was a growl, fists tight at her side. A moment later, she scrunched her face up and spun around and started marching out of the throne room, picking up her bow sitting next to her throne. Each step was very dramatic, like a child who didn't like being told off. "Artemis, where are you going?" "To beat up that jerk and tie my bow around his damn neck." Zeus rolled his eyes at his daughter's declaration. "Return to your throne, Artemis." It took a minute of coaxing, but the moon goddess returned to her seat, her expression locked into one of anger. The image of his daughter wrapping her bow around the blonde's neck was very appealing. Everyone appeared to be trying to find words, but so many of them couldn't find the right ones. It was a rather big bombshell to drop. The only one who hadn't spoken was Athena, whose thoughts must have been a jumbled mess in that head of hers. "Are you all right, Athena?" Artemis was the one who spoke and leaned over her throne to tap on her shoulder sister's arm. The goddess of wisdom didn't react. Instead, she just continued to stare at the floor, worrying her father and amusing other members of the family. "I think you broke her, Dad," Apollo joked as a camera flash went off across the throne room. The god of war grinned before handing over a camera to the love goddess, Diet. "I've never seen her look speechless before. I want to savor the moment." She turned and winked at Ares. "Thanks, honey. You get a special treat later." One of her hands reached up and patted his cheek. Looking pleased with himself, the god of war's eyes lit up into tiny balls of fire, similar to those of his aunt's. "Anytime, babe." Swoosh. Ow. Aphrodite held her hand between her knees, tiny droplets of golden ichor spilling onto the floor alongside the destroyed camera. A hiss escaped her lips, feeling the cut now running across the side of her hand. She glared over at the goddess who fired the arrow. "What was that for?" "Leave her alone. I won't let you make a fool out of Athena. Can't you see she's trying to collect her thoughts?" Artemis defended. That's exactly why I wanted a photo. I want to remember that expression of hers. Do you want me to rearrange your face? 'Cause I'll happily oblige. Zeus ran a hand over his face as the two troublesome deities got into another one of their arguments. Granted, he wouldn't fault Artemis for stepping in to defend her clearly dazed sister, but he didn't need them getting into another fight. Speaking of Athena, it was tough to imagine what was happening in her mind. He was well aware of how much she loved going to that little cafe. Her smile was present more often after returning from trip there. Whether he wanted to admit it or not, Athena had developed a soft spot for the immortal who owned it, as did Artemis. Betrayal was likely on her mind, having been duped by the man all this time about his true origins. He heard Poseidon shuffle around on his throne, turning to look at his brother. "Are you sure leaving your daughter with someone like that is a good idea?" he asked quietly. "I don't know much about the race of men created by our grandmother, but I know they were stronger than all the other generations." "Not really, but I trust our sister's judgment." Zeus didn't like it, but Hestia had convinced him the best place for Talia was with Naruto. He's strong. Strong enough to keep Hades and me from coming to blows. I don't know the full extent of his powers, and I don't know if I want to know. I have a feeling he might be a thorn in our side. What form that will take, only time will tell. Do you really think your children are going to listen? The idea of Zeus's children following the new decree was laughable. Each one of them inherited his stubbornness and pig-headedness. A snort broke from Zeus. "What do you think? I have no doubt they will find a way to go back there. Hopefully, Talia will have a couple of years of normalcy before that happens. I trust something will divert their attention for a while. Hopefully, some normalcy for once will befall Olympus." The god of the sea felt his brother was being optimistic. There's no such thing as normal when it comes to this family. Preaching to the choir there, brother. Zeus reiterated before a commotion broke out in front of him. "Artemis, get off Aphrodite. Our bodies are not supposed to bend that way." 6 months later, "Thank you, and have a Merry Christmas," Naruto said as he watched a pair of customers exit the Fox's Den and return to the cold New York streets. It was safe to say December had thus far been his busiest month as he approached the first anniversary of opening his cafe. There was something about the holiday of Christmas that made people crave warmth and delicious baked goods. Dressed in a festive Christmas jumper and wearing a Santa hat that covered most of his blonde hair, he'd freely admit he was getting into the spirit of the holiday this year. In the past, he treated Christmas like any ordinary day. It was a day for spending with your family and loved ones and spreading joy. All it did was serve as a reminder of what he didn't have anymore. However, this year, it wasn't an option for him to wallow in his own self-pity with a very excited little girl now living with him. It was safe to say the daughter of Zeus was beyond excited for Christmas. With Hestia's help and guidance, the pair decorated his home into a Christmas haven with a big tree standing tall in his living room. "Uncle, Uncle," he heard and turned to smile at Talia, who dashed over and jumped in the air, only for the blonde to catch her mid-jump. The dark-haired girl giggled as he bounced her in his arms. "How much longer until we can go home?" "Not long, Talia," he replied, smiling at being referred to as uncle. "You and Aunt Hestia are heading home first, and I'll be home in another hour. I have to tidy up." Can't Mel do it?" "You always have to do it," she asked, a pouty expression on her face. "Now, I wouldn't be a good boss if I left it for Melano to do alone, would I?" With that said, the door to the kitchen pushed open and out walked the goddess of ghosts, dressed in mortal clothing and a bright Christmas jumper on her person. It had taken about 2 weeks and a lot of prodding by Hestia before finally caving in. The daughter of Hades wasn't the jolliest of people, preferring to wear only the color black. He watched as said goddess walked to her customer's table and placed 2 small wrap boxes next to an elderly couple. Both contained mince pies, though one was traditional, and the other was a pineapple and rum variation he concocted. "Here are your orders. Have a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year," she said in a sickly sweet voice that was slowly decaying her insides for even performing. The young goddess was very rough around the edges during her first month, and more often than not, Naruto would find customers sprinting out of the Fox's Den for fear of their lives. It took some time and training on appropriate customer service until he was confident he'd drilled the do's and don'ts into her skull. Once the customers were out of the building, her gloomy expression returned. "Thank my father, that's over with," she muttered and turned to look at her employer and his charge. "Please tell me it's almost over. 10 more minutes, and that's it. Thank the gods for that." "Uncle, why is Mel always grumpy?" Talia asked, turning to look up at the blonde. "That's a good question, Talia," he replied, looking at the little girl in amusement. "I don't think she gets enough sleep. She stays up long past her bedtime and listens to music that's too loud. There is nothing wrong with my choice of music. It's not my fault you and Aunt Hestia only listen to oldies. Who listens to Chubby Checker these days?" Across the years, as music evolved, the best friends had enlightened themselves with music from each generation. From Chubby Checker to the Supremes. From Elvis Presley to David Bowie. From a Who to Aretha Franklin. If there was one thing the pair could praise Apollo for, it was the evolution of sound over the recent century. There was nothing like it back in Naruto's time in Konoha. Nothing close. On Friday evenings after the den was closed, the immortal shinobi and the goddess of the hearth would find themselves in his living room with a bottle of wine and music from all decades playing. Sometimes Talia was fast asleep, and other times the daughter of Zeus was shaking her little booty alongside the two. The other night, Hestia showed her niece how to do the twist. Motorhead and Black Sabbath. Now that's music. It's rude to question someone else's taste in music with such negativity, Melano. The younger goddess nearly jumped in the air before turning to find Hestia staring at her from a couple of feet away. Her ever-present smile was on her face, which only served to frighten Melano more. She dressed in winter gear with a long coat with a fluffy hood. It was a light pink, which Aphrodite would have approved. A bag of presents was in her hand, all of which had Talia's name written all over them. Tomorrow was the 21st of December. That meant it was almost time for the winter solstice. Such an important event meant little to Naruto, and even Hestia, who saw it as little more as a meeting for her siblings to bicker amongst each other. In particular, Hades would be visiting, which meant there would be a small queue of people looking to pick a fight with the god of the underworld. She would put in her time there to play peacekeeper between her family as she always did, but this year, she was more invested in the 22nd. The day after the winter solstice happened to be Talia's birthday, and Hestia had already retrieved the little girl's birthday presents, as well as Christmas presents. The whole week, the daughter of Zeus was going to be spoiled rotten. Together, Naruto and herself were working on her birthday cake. All 5 layers of it. It might have looked over the top, but it was a memorable birthday. Even Zeus, who'd been kept on a very tight leash by Hera since the summer solstice, managed to subtly give her a present to give to his daughter, without the other gods noticing. She said he was welcome to join them, but the king declined the offer. If the other gods caught him breaking the rules, he'd never hear the end of it. Just because we don't share the same taste in music doesn't make that a bad thing. It's good to have variety. I know. I completely agree. She waved her hands in the air to reason with the older deity. Behind her, Naruto and Talia looked at each other before the dark-haired demigod started giggling. She jumped down from the blonde's arms and grabbed Melano's free hand. "It's okay, Mel. I know Annie Hestia can be scary sometimes, but Uncle says she's a big softie at heart. He says she's like a big bowl of pudding." A nervous chuckle escaped Naruto's lip, feeling the eyes of the goddess turn in his direction. "A big bowl of pudding, am I?" Her eerie smile strengthened. "I'll try to remember that piece of information the next time I decide to make us a family dinner. Maybe I'll throw in some spice next time. A real fire breather. It was a jest, that's all. Talia knows I was only kidding." The daughter of Zeus shook her head. Then Uncle said that when Annie gets mad, make her some tea, and she calms down. Did he now? The blonde grumbled and shot the little girl a dirty look. All he received was a big smile in return. "You're lucky you're adorable," he muttered and ruffled the girl's hair. "Anyway, are you girls heading home?" Both looked dressed to leave, with the goddess eyeing the weather conditions. "We are. I assume we can expect you home in an hour." She crouched down and pulled up the zip on Talia's coat. She didn't want her niece to get cold. Then, much to the daughter of Zeus's displeasure, grabbed a woolly pink hat from her pocket, neatly putting it on her head. It wasn't so much the hat that bothered the girl, but the color. Pink was a no-no color, but Talia would have to endure it for now. Yeah, that's the plan. The blonde shinobi rubbed the back of his neck. 2 more days before he would be closing his doors for the remainder of the holidays. The Fox's Den wouldn't be reopening until the January 2nd, leaving him with time to spend with Hestia and Talia. He was sorely looking forward to the time off. All right, don't push yourself too hard, Hestia told him. He worked far too hard, in her opinion, and didn't take enough time to himself. She took her niece's hand. Come on, sweetie. Let's get your backpack from the office, and we'll head home. Okay. Chuckling at Talia's eagerness as the pair walked to the back, Naruto turned his attention to the room. There weren't too many people left, most having left over an hour ago. It was doubtful he'd get any more customers. Most people wanted to be with their families since it was so close to Christmas, and he couldn't fault them. Scanning the people, he turned his attention to the young woman sitting at the back of the room with his back to him. If he remembered correctly, she ordered an oolong tea and a small piece of carrot cake. That was 30 minutes again. Straightening his shirt, he walked over to find the woman looking out the window with her chin resting in her palm. After almost half a minute passed, Naruto let out a short cough to get her attention. The reaction was instant, and the woman jolted awake and turned to look at him. Huh? Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say something? She asked, an embarrassed expression appearing. My head was elsewhere. Naruto smiled. I just wanted to check if you wanted anything else. I think you finished your tea a little while ago. Would you like a top-up? The woman looked down into her mug. No. I'm okay, thanks. The woman started to say. Naruto watched as she turned her attention outside and noticed her staring at another woman walking along the pavement, a young girl no older than Talia holding her hand. Both looked happy, with bags likely filled with presents in the woman's other hand. A sigh escaped her mouth, and her fingers tightened around the handle on the mug. Naruto didn't need to be telepathic to know something was on her mind. Something on your mind? I take it? She nodded, something like that. It's kind of hard to explain. She told him, actually wait. It's not hard to explain. It's just something I wasn't expecting. The blonde shinobi frowned, tilting his head. She started as if trying to find the words. I hadn't been feeling too good these last few days. I thought it was just a bug, but it turns out it was morning sickness. I'm pregnant. Oh, congratulations. He replied and noticed her uneasy expression. That's good, right? She didn't look too sure. The woman looked down at her mug. I think so, she said, before looking unsure again. I don't know. Having a baby is supposed to be a joyous moment, you know? It's meant to be one of the biggest moments in a woman's life. She shook her head, causing her dark brown hair to wave across her face. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be saying all this to someone I don't know. Naruto waved his hands in front of him. Don't worry. It's a good event. Keeping it all locked and usually doesn't end well. He held out his hand to the woman. I'm Naruto. I'm the owner of the Fox's Denver. The woman eyed him for a moment before tentatively shaking his hand. Sally, she replied, and eyed him curiously. I've never met a Naruto before. I'd be surprised if you did. It's not a name you find in this corner of the world. He admitted, before turning back to the previous subject. So, I guess your pregnancy wasn't planned? Sally's hand returned to her mug. Not at all. I always knew I wanted children, but I didn't think I'd be starting so young. I only turned 22 a month ago. Coincidentally, that's when I met him. The father? He asked, with Sally nodding. Have you told him? No, though I'm sure he already knows. Sally got a faraway look in her eyes. Not that I'll ever see him again. She looked back at the blonde. Our time together was a bit of a whirlwind. Where is he now? Somewhere at sea. I imagine, Sally muttered, her eyes becoming half-lidded, lost in a wave of memories as she remembered her whirlwind time with the father of her unborn child. Naruto went to open his mouth, but her words lingered in his mind. His eyes traveled down to her stomach, where one of her hands rested, gently stroking her currently flat belly. Why did this scenario sound so familiar? A young and beautiful mortal woman. A whirlwind romance. Unplanned pregnancy. Father nowhere in sight. Yep, definitely familiar. And she said, somewhere at sea. He thought, before letting out a low groan, one hand rising to massage his forehead. As much as it could have been a coincidence, the blonde shinobi doubted it. This guy you had a whirlwind romance with?" he asked, watching Sally turn her attention back to him. Black hair? Tanned? Neatly trimmed beard, and looks like he lifted weights all his life. Has an unhealthy obsession with Hawaiian shirts. If he had any talent in painting, the picture of Sally would be similar to the scream. Her jaw dropped, so low it was a surprise he didn't have to pick it up from the floor. Why, no, Padash. Never met him, but I've met his brothers. The elder and the younger one. He revealed, running a hand through his blonde hair. My best friend also happens to be his sister, who is currently walking into the room right now. A moment later, Hestia, along with Talia at her side, appeared through the kitchen door, and he wasted no time in ushering them over. If possible, Sally went as pale as a person could go, her face a mask of disbelief and shock as she watched arguably the most beautiful woman she'd ever seen approach their table. Hestia didn't say anything, but as she drew closer, Naruto watched as her attention shifted from him to the young mortal woman on the other side of the table. Her eyes, usually calm and serene, became distant as they trailed down Sally's body until resting on her stomach. Sally didn't move, nor did she react as Hestia's free hand moved forward and hovered over her womb. A shroud of warmth blanketed over her body and washed with nerves of steel as the goddess's eyes grew brighter. "Sally, meet Hestia," Naruto muttered, though he had a feeling the young woman was putting the deity's identity together already. It was a wonder just how much she already knew. The goddess of the hearth just stood there for a few moments before retracting her hand. "Hestia?" Hestia took a calming breath. "That idiot is in so much trouble when I get my hands on him. Yikes. I would not like to be Poseidon right now." He didn't want to think what the woman would do to her brother once she got a hold of him. Pinching the bridge of his nose, he let out a low sigh and leaned back in his chair. What was it with this family and their problems ending up on his doorstep? Well, so much for peace and quiet in the foreseeable future. Part XVLLL 4 years later. Are you sure this doesn't feel too small? Naruto asked, leaning against the glass cabinet and holding a slim black book in his hands. He toyed around with it, running his fingers across the smooth leather, feeling the tiny indentations in the material with the tips. Was the old menu really too big for the customers? I thought people like variety. Behind him, the goddess of the hearth gracefully moved between the tables where customers were enjoying their drinks and snacks. A tray rested between her left arm and her side, coming to lean against the side of the counter with him. Dressed in clothes similar to Naruto's, a white dress shirt with an orange apron tied across the front, the deity had made some not-so-subtle touches in the past couple of years to the Fox's Den. Truthfully, he was beginning to wonder if it was such a good idea to let her work here. Not that he'd ever say that to her. "Naruto, we've been over this." "I know, but still," the blonde started, looking back and forth between Hestia and the new menu. "I like the old menu. There was nothing wrong with it." An exasperated sigh left the goddess's lips. The menu was growing out of control. You kept adding too much into it, and you weren't taking anything out in return. The old menu, while nice, had grown to the point where Hestia had to put her foot down. When she started working at the Fox's Den, she originally agreed she wouldn't micromanage the cafe. Admittedly, she did point out a few areas where the Fox's Den could improve, and the small changes she made had been for the better. Naruto was happy to work alongside his best friend, but there was a line in the sand. The condition of the menu proved how stubborn both parties could be when they disagreed on something. Hestia wanted to downsize the menu, and Naruto felt it was fine as it was. Inevitably, Hestia's persistence defeated Naruto's stubbornness, and the blonde conceded to make some changes to the menu. Now half the size, the new menu was much more customer-friendly and didn't leave customers at a loss of what to order from having too many choices. They kept the special of the day, of which Naruto and Hestia would take turns in choosing and making. More often than not, the pair would find themselves competing with each other, keeping track of how many were bought and eaten by customers, and comparing who got more by the end of the week. They would tally up the result on Sunday, the one day a week the Fox's Den wasn't opened, and the loser would have to cook Sunday dinner. "Yeah, I guess I did," he admitted. "Melano, was the menu too big?" Yes, the goddess of ghosts was still working as a waitress for Naruto, though she wasn't showing open disdain for the job, nor was she scaring customers away. At least, not as often. Melano had fallen into the role as a waitress rather well in the last 4 years, and despite Naruto and Hestia telling her she didn't have to keep working there, the younger goddess continued to appear. Hades had confided in his sister 2 years after finding out about the blonde he'd dismissed his daughter from keeping watch over him months earlier. She didn't need to be there, but it appeared the reclusive daughter of the underworld enjoyed being in their company. Not that she would ever admit it out loud. The old menu was big enough to be a life raft for someone lost at sea. She replied, appearing amused as the blonde's shoulders dropped. The new one is far superior. Much more classy, while remaining affordable to the masses. The customers like it more too. No one wants to read a menu the size of a novel. A triumphant look washed over Hestia's face. Fine, fine. I concede. The new menu is better. That was hard for him to admit since he'd solely create the original, but he'd concede the new one made more sense than the previous. But no more changes, please. I like my little cafe just the way it is. Hestia giggled and pinched his cheek, only serving to get a pout from the blonde. All right, you big baby. No more changes. Thank you. The door to the front of the fox's den chimed open, and Naruto was ready and waiting as someone barreled into him. His clone had dispersed a minute ago, alerting him to their arrival as he found the blue eyes of Talia Grace looking up at him. Uncla? Hello, Talia, he said while patting the top of her head. How was school? The 9-year-old didn't answer immediately, first turning and embracing her aunt, whose arms were open and ready to wrap themselves around the form of her darling niece. The little girl that was abandoned at his doorstep so long ago had grown so much. It was okay, I guess. I have to read Chapter 4 of Matilda tonight and discuss it with the class tomorrow. Miss Carter said she'd be asking everyone in the class questions tomorrow, so she'll know if anyone hasn't read it. Then we'll go over it tonight before your bath. Hestia offered, happy her niece was informing them of the work set. At one point, Talia had been hiding the fact homework was set for the class, mainly when focused on reading. It wasn't all surprising Talia had an aversion to reading. Minds of the demigods that came from her pantheon were wired for Greek rather than English and caused a great deal of struggle for a demigod of Talia's age. It took years of practice to get a grip on reading in the common tongue of the country. They spoke with Talia privately in the space of their home and promised to help her with her homework, her reading in particular. Okay, Talia replied, shrugging her shoulders, though not appearing happy about it. There had been some tantrums in the past when it came to Talia's reading, but the little girl knew she couldn't get away with anything when her aunt was around. A moment later, another pair of eyes were looking up at Naruto and Hestia. Instead of blue, they were tiny pools of sea green, reminiscent of the Mediterranean Sea. Hi, Uncle. Naruto smiled and picked up the small child before plopping him down on the counter. Hello, Percy. The little boy then turned to his aunt. Hi, Auntie. A giggle escaped Hestia's lips as her hand smoothed down her nephew's jet black hair. The son of her brother, Poseidon, looked very much like his godly parent. The same eyes, hair, and even his nose were the same. Hello, Perseus. You two didn't leave your mom behind again, did you? The door jingled, and a voice replied, they did. Walking into the fox's den, Sally Jackson appeared, looking out of breath, likely trying to catch up with her 3-year-old son and his 8-year-old cousin. Percy, what did I tell you about running off? She asked, taking off her jacket to reveal a similar uniform to Hestia and pulled out a black scrunchie to tie back her hair. Not to. And what did you do? Run off. Percy tilted his head to one side, making him look cuter than he usually appeared. Sally's expression softened at the look, as did Hestia, while Naruto patted his head. Naruto wasn't a betting man, but he had a feeling the young son of Poseidon was going to be a real heartbreaker when he was older. Sally sighed. What am I to do with you? She asked, softly running her fingers through her son's dark hair and kissing his forehead, much to his delight. You're going to stay with Aunt Hestia and Talia while Mommy works. Be good. I will. I'll get my jacket, and then we'll be on our way. Hestia disappeared with the two demigods trailing close behind, with Percy quickly grabbing onto his older cousin's hand. The act was enough to make Naruto and Sally smile. The pair looked more like siblings than cousins. You know, Melano and I can handle things today if you want an early night. You look tired, Sally. The brunette mortal waved off the worry. I'm fine. I was up late trying to finish a report that's due this morning. It took longer than I thought it would. A lot had changed for Sally Jackson in 5 years, ever since that fateful meeting during the Christmas holidays. Finding out she was pregnant with a father absent from her life, a job that wouldn't support her financially with a new baby and no family to call on for help. She'd never felt more lost in her life. She'd wandered through New York aimlessly for what felt like hours before eventually ending up the Fox's Den unbeknownst to her. She'd wandered into the right place and met people that ultimately helped her get her life in order. Naruto had been, for the lack of a discretion, a guardian angel to her. She was never religious by nature, but a small part of her felt like some unknown power had guided her to his doorstep that day. He changed her life for the better. Through him, she met Hestia, Melano, and of course, Talia. Said little girl had been a constant presence in her life as she grew heavy with her son and seemed to find some kind of fascination that a baby was growing in her tummy. Needless to say, some of the questions she ended up using left the blonde a spluttering mess and looked to Hestia to solve the issue. Sometimes the goddess of the hearth came to the rescue, while other times enjoyed watching the blonde squirm under the gaze of the 5-year-old and her endless curiosity. They were with her every step of the way. They helped her get an apartment near where they lived in the West Village. They gave her a job and financial stability to support her and Percy once her son was born, and even helped her apply for courses at the local community college. When she was away studying for her business management course, either Hestia or Naruto would keep an eye on Percy for her. The blonde even went as far as to teach her some of his recipes, with the goddess occasionally adding her 2 cents in. She couldn't help but wonder how those two had stayed friends for so long. Sally was no expert, but she was sure she sensed chemistry there. Even Melano looked after the pair a few times, though often found her son and his cousin in very precarious situations. A few weeks ago, when she arrived to collect Percy from Naruto's home, she found her son being held by his ankles in the air by Talia while his head was dunked in a fish tank, babbling nonsense to the goldfish. She almost had a heart attack, though her son's grinning face when he spotted her was enough to tell her he was fine. Naruto's hand rested on her shoulder and guided her to the kitchen. Come on, let's head to the back and see how well you remember the triple berry Nutella cupcakes recipes. On the building across from the Fox's Den, perched on the edge of the roof that looked down over the streets, 2 sets of eyes watched the interior with keen looks. One stared inquisitively, while the second looked longingly. 2 birds sat motionlessly, one a beautiful brown-feathered owl, the other a hawk of similar coloring. This is stupid. Why are we even here? This is towing the fine line Father set up when he forbade us from visiting. SSSHH. Stop talking, or we'll be spotted. I think we both know that's not going to happen. Unless mortals can climb up vertical surfaces like a spider monkey, I'd say we're safe. The gray eyes of the owl starred in the silver ones of the hawk, and if she didn't know any better, could have sworn a bead of drool was slipping through her beak. You have a problem. You know that, right? Inside the Fox's Den, they watched the blonde immortal walk across the interior and place down a small tray of cupcakes in front of the customer. Artemis let out a short gasp and a groan of longing. Double chocolate peanut butter filled cupcakes. Oh, that mortal is so lucky. Why wouldn't give to be them right now? Your stomach is truly made of celestial bronze, Athena replied. Although, deep down, she had to agree. They were delicious. In the last 5 years, the goddess of wisdom would like to say she'd followed her father's commands to the letter and stayed far away from the Fox's Den, but that would be a lie. It took 6 months, impressive in her own mind for having the willpower to stay away, before she inevitably found herself spying on the cafe and carefully watching the blonde owner. Naturally, she was full of questions. We could sneak in, right? We would be caught the moment we walked through the door. Aunt Hestia would recognize us immediately, as would Melano. Naruto, Her gray eyes gazed back through the window and watched the blonde as he brought out another tray of yummy goodness. Well, there's no telling what would happen, but I imagine he would know it was us too. Asai escaped Artemis. It's not fair. I might be angry at the blonde fool for lying to us, but I still miss the food. I overheard Aunt Hestia mention that they've created a new menu together. Could you imagine what those two have cooked up together? Naruto and Hestia double-teaming in the kitchen were enough to make Artemis go weak at the knees. There was no telling what kind of scrumptious goodies they were cooking up in the kitchen. Knowing she couldn't reach out and devour them was torture. I'm still surprised Hestia went to work there. She spent more time at the Fox's Den and Naruto's residence than she does on Olympus these days. Now that she doesn't need to hide her friendship within him, we hardly see her. All of the other gods on Olympus noticed the lack of the hearth deity. Zeus, in particular, would grumble about his beloved older sister spending time with that uncouth blonde in the mortal world. Honestly, who said uncouth anymore? Their father could get jealous easily, and seeing Hestia enjoying the company of someone that wasn't one of them felt otherworldly. He didn't like it, but wouldn't voice it unless he wanted to earn his sister's ire. Poseidon, Hera, and Demeter were less put off by it. But still, the absence of the goddess of the hearth had been felt by the siblings in particular than the rest. Only Hades didn't appear to be putting up a front about it. Then again, Artemis was sure Melano was transporting precious cargo back to the underworld for their uncle and occasionally Persephone when it was time for the goddess of spring to take to her second home. I know, it's so unfair, Artemis whined, trying not to glare at the mortals leaving the Fox's Den with boxes of goodies secured comfortably in their grasp. Just imagining what might be in the box was enough to make Artemis's stomach growl. Before either could say another word, and before Artemis could swoop down and steal the mortals' boxed baked goods from their hands, a shroud of warmth appeared from behind them. Athena and Artemis felt something warm grab them by the scruffs of the neck and hold them in the air, unfazed by their attempts to wriggle out of the grasp. They found the warm and curious eyes of their aunt staring at them, one eyebrow raised. A soft glow of fire illuminated around her body, with two tendril-like arms sprouting from either side and responsible for grabbing the sisters and holding them in the air like grapes on a vine. "What are you two doing here?" Hestia asked, her voice calm, though with a hint of annoyance clear for both to hear. "Aunt Hestia, fancy seeing you here. What brings you to this part of the city?" Artemis stammered out. Hestia's face didn't change, but did turn to Athena rather than Artemis. "I know you're not going to pretend to be stupid. I know how beneath you that is, niece." She felt the goddess of the moon deflate in her grasp at her words. "You both know you're not supposed to be anywhere near the Fox's Denver. If Zeus catches wind that you're here, there will be trouble. I don't particularly want a thunderstorm hovering over the city. Not when I'm about to walk home with the children." Their father was constantly reminding everyone of the rule in recent memory. It wasn't just Athena and Artemis that tried to sneak a peek, but the others Olympians too, with Apollo and Aphrodite being the two biggest culprits. The god of the sun tried to sneak in the early morning in disguise, covered head to toe in clothing he'd never be seen and that covered up his dashingly handsome good looks and masking his godly energy. Twice this year Zeus came down from Olympus, grabbed his son by the scruff of his neck, and dragged him back home. Apollo would end up grounded for a month, only allowed out to drive the sun chariot across the sky. Aphrodite, on the other hand, had been trying to sneak into his home, morphing into a dove and sprawling herself out across his bed in not-so-subtle lingerie, hoping to seduce the hunky blonde into her awaiting arms. Instead, all she found was the goddess of the hearth waiting for her, grabbing her by the ear and dragging her back to Olympus. The goddess of love was persistent in her attempt to try and seduce Naruto. "I know, but the only reason I'm here is to stop Artemis from breaking the rules. The rules don't state we can't watch from a distance." Athena replied, trying to hold her ground against her aunt, but feeling herself wither at the glance she got back. "We're not technically doing anything wrong. I think we both know that's pushing it." Hestia snapped her fingers. Artemis and Athena both felt their forms shift and return to their normal states. "I suppose I should be impressed you managed to last this long, unlike your brother and Aphrodite." The glow around Hestia vanished. "Don't lump us in with those buffoons," Artemis muttered. God, she didn't want to be compared to those pair of airheads. Hestia shook her head and rubbed her forehead. "Go home, both of you. I don't like splitting my essence like this when I'm meant to be watching over the children." Talia, and a look of distaste washed over Athena's face, Poseidon's boy. "I'm still surprised that the child and his mother ended up in Naruto's care. It's almost as if the fates are trying to align the paths of the children of the big three to him." Well, if there's anything I've learned since knowing Naruto, it's that he has a habit of attracting people from all walks of life. Both have flourished with him around and taken an active role in their lives. Hestia moved towards her nieces and looked down at the shop below them. "He started teaching Talia to bake, you know. She's quite good at it. We both think she has a knack for it. The daughter of Zeus has a preference for cupcakes with lots of icing. They had to be careful they didn't let her eat too much. Otherwise, the girl would find herself bouncing from wall to wall with the electricity across the block going crazy. The last time she had a sugar rush, all the electrical appliances in their home and the next 2 homes blew up. That's nice and everything, but I think there's a conversation we haven't had since news of Poseidon's son became public to Olympus." Athena crossed her arms and hardened the look in her eyes. Is it wise for Talia Grace and Percy Jackson to be allowed to remain so close to each other when their sin alone attracts the biggest and most dangerous monsters that plague our children and descendants? I have yet to see Naruto's skills in action, and have yet to see how he would handle such a foe. Hestia remained tight-lipped about the capabilities of the blonde. Neither could get their aunt to answer many of their questions, nor the other gods for that matter. Both of them, as warrior deities, wanted to know how well he could handle himself. To be able to put himself between their father and their uncle and walk away alive was a feat in itself. What they had managed to piece together was the fighting capabilities of the old ones. The men of gold that reigned during the era of the Titans were far greater than that of mortals in this day and age, with powers and skills that few could dream of. It would be like something out of fable or a comic book. But he was a man of gold like no other. Someone Gia herself visited to aid the Titans in defeating the Olympians during their rise to power. They knew he was strong, but how strong? Both wanted to learn that answer. None more so than Athena, who hated seeing a puzzle she couldn't solve. To their surprise, Hestia merely smiles and lets out a low chuckle. "Trust me when I saw this, sweet niece. There is no one on this planet more capable of fending off the monsters that plague the children of the gods than the man currently teaching Sally Jackson the correct way to make triple berry Nutella cupcakes." Hestia informed. Naruto was an iron wall between Talia and Percy and the monsters that might try to harm them. They wouldn't be able to go over, beneath, around, or through said wall. They would merely be blocked every time and sent to their doom for trying to reach the children. He was a protector, a guardian. How sure are you? I'd bet my essence on it. Every last drop of it. The statement was enough to make the sisters look at one another. "Now, go on." Hestia made a little shoe notion with her hand. "I'll keep this little visit our secret, but next time I will inform Zeus. Rules are here for a reason, and I won't always bend them for you. Leave it be." Giving one last smile, Hestia warped away in a swirl of fire, leaving the sisters alone on the rooftop to ponder everything she had said. It was the elder of the two who acted first. "Come on." Athena huffed, grabbing her sister by the sleeve of her shirt. "Let's go before Hestia makes good on her promise. I don't feel like getting confined to my temple anytime soon." Fine." Artemis groaned but followed along. "Do you think we can convince Hera to make us her famous shepherd's pie?" At the same time as the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of the moon were making their way back to Olympus, a very different immortal also found themselves in New York City, though this one was visiting for a different reason. Knowing New York was technically under the jurisdiction of the Olympian pantheon, he didn't appear to care as he teleported his way to Midgard and threw himself into their backyard. He wasn't afraid of any Olympian, but he ensured his arrival was subtle, lest he wanted to face the wrath of his father and mother. They were far more frightening than some puny god like Zeus or Ares. Their arms were twigs in comparison to his own. A deep, bellyful laugh broke the calm silence as men and women peacefully going about their afternoon through Central Park were caught unaware. All stopped and couldn't help but marvel at the sight they were seeing in front of them. "Come on, one more. No, 5 more. Better yet, 10 more. Let me show you my great strength." A pair of large and meaty hands ushered a woman forward, soon followed by a squeal as he hoisted her up and placed her on his wide and powerful shoulders. "I'm sure I came here for a reason, but I'm having such fun with you, young mortals." Some laughed at the exuberance that vibrated from the man, while others looked at him as if he wasn't human. Was he one of those strong men that competed in lifting competitions? It would explain the physical strength he was displaying to everyone. He had the body for it, with arms like tree trunks and standing somewhere around 6.5 feet tall. 4 women sat on his enormous shoulders, 2 on each side with his arms extended out. It looked as if he wasn't even trying, and all 4 girls looked as if they were having the time of their lives, with one being so bold to run her hand beneath his vest. There wasn't even sweat on his brow. His shoulder-length red hair wasn't even sticking to his skin. "You Midgardians are so light. It's like I'm lifting little more than feathers." He tried to usher another woman over, claiming he could fit another one on those wide shoulders of his, but none dared to step forward. "There are none who can match my strength throughout the 9 realms." Just who in the world was this guy? A few more minutes passed before the jovial man appeared to have enough, as a look of recollection appeared on his face. Letting the 4 women off his shoulders, he gave one last laugh, an eyebrow wiggle before a determined look was on his face. He swept his hand through his long hair before asking, "I'm looking for a place known as the West Village. I'm in search of a man who runs a shop of sorts. He calls it the Fox's Den." He fumbled around in his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. A crude drawing of a blond man with whiskers was on full display, though it looked as if it was drawn by an 8-year-old. Rather than a grown man, "He looks like this." Everyone looked at him funny as they stared at the drawing, though none dared to voice a joke about the man's lack of drawing talent. By chance, one of the girls that were on his shoulder had visited that very afternoon and was good enough to point him in the right direction. "You're sure?" "Yeah, I'm pretty sure. That's the guy behind the counter." The red-haired man gave a loud laugh and surprised the woman by planting a big kiss on her lips, leaving the woman swooning and baffled at the same time. He was overjoyed and didn't remain for much longer before everyone watched as he took off at speeds that should have been possible for one as large as himself. The last thing any of them saw was the man reaching for his waist and pulling up a hammer with a large trapezoidal-shaped iron slab. He waved it in the air as he pursued his target. Naruto tapped his chin as he inspected the cupcake, taking everything in over its form, smell, and taste. Smell? Check. The wave of chocolate wafting around his nose was perfect. Not too overpowering, nor was it too sickly. The ratio was just right. Texture? Check. Nice and fluffy, just how they were meant to be. It didn't want to fall apart with the slightest bit of pressure and wasn't too hard that it became uncomfortable to eat. The most important part, though, was the taste. Everything rode on how well the cupcake tasted in his mouth. The last batch Sally made was passable, but that wasn't enough to serve their loyal customers. A standard was set by the blonde, and later on, Hestia when she officially joined them. Some could say it wasn't fair to put such pressure on Sally's shoulders, but it wasn't like they were asking her to master a dozen recipes in a short time frame. Sally had asked for them to teach her a thing or two about baking, and by Olympus, they would do just that. Speaking off said woman, she stood a few feet to the side, ignoring the clones at work around her and gazing nervously at her boss. If she was to work at the Fox's Den, then Naruto had to warn her about some of the strange things she would see. It wasn't every day a mortal, even a clear-sighted mortal like Sally, came across a dozen or so carbon copies of the man who employed her working around the kitchen. To her credit, she took it on the chin and fell right into the craziness, as if she belonged there from the very start. One of her hands gently pulled on her sleeve, trying to take a calming breath as the blonde lifted one of the cupcakes up to his mouth and took a bite out of it. She tried not to look too visibly nervous, but she didn't want to let Naruto nor Hestia down. Both had shown her on multiple occasions how to make the cupcakes, and felt she was getting closer and closer to perfecting them. Was it strange that she wanted to make them proud? She didn't think so. They'd done so much for her that she wanted to show them every day that their time and effort had been for nothing. She heard him say aloud, licking his lips as he tried to gather up any loose crumbs. I gotta say, Sally. He turned and looked at her and smiled. They're perfect. Sally's eyes lit up. Really? They are. Yeah. I can't taste a single fault with them. If I didn't know any better, I'd say Hestia or myself made these. Rubbing his hands together, he took a step forward and rested a hand on Sally's head. Good job, Sally. I'm proud of you. Why you are? The former lover of Poseidon asked, doing her best not to get misty-eyed at the compliments sent her way. Of course. Whatever Hestia, myself, or the world for that matter has thrown at you, you've adapted and worked hard. You never stop trying to better yourself, and it shows in the food you make. He picked up the tray with the rest of the cupcakes and handed them back to Sally, who grasped at the edges eagerly. I think these deserve to go in the cabinet, and make sure you tell people who made them. I'm sure they would all be very pleased to eat anything made by your hands. Sally was very well loved by the regulars who dined at the Fox's Denver. For many of them, they'd watched Sally prosper into the confident young woman she was today. Even better for Naruto, who got to watch her blossom as an incredible mother to young Percy. He'd been there in the waiting room at the hospital when she was giving birth to the son of Poseidon. According to Hestia, Sally kicked childbirth's ass. All 19 hours of it. He still didn't understand how women did it all these years later. Kudos to them. Minutes later, the back door that led to the alleyway swung open, with Naruto walking out with a trash bag gripped in one hand. Whistling a jaunty little tune with a slight skip in his step, he moved to the nearby bin and threw the bag inside. I wonder what Hestia is making Percy and Talia for dinner tonight. I know Talia has her hopes on burgers, but I doubt she'd make them 2 nights in a row. He laughed, imagining a patient-looking Hestia with her arms crossed as Talia stomped unhappily in front of her, her fingers in her ears, and trying to hold her breath. The daughter of Zeus had certainly inherited her father's stubbornness and often tried to get her own way by acting out, but Hestia was no stranger to such dramatics. If she could handle one such as Zeus, she could handle a young girl. He didn't know what the record was, but Hestia was overwhelmingly in the lead, whilst Talia only had a victory or 2 over the past 4 years. Found you. Blinking in surprise, Naruto had little time to react as he jumped high in the air, using his chakra to stick to a nearby wall as a large object flew past the spot he was previously standing. Turning his head to the entrance of the alleyway, he fought back a groan when he spotted a familiar deity blocking the way, his hand outstretched. Thor, what are you doing here? A jovial laugh escaped the god of thunder as his hammer, Mjolnir, flew back into his hand in the blink of an eye. A grin was plastered on his face and swept his long red hair back as his intense blue eyes stared down the blonde with unfavored glee. My old friend, I've spent the better part of a month trying to track you down until I finally got the word you were in this city. He swung his hammer in the air, his smile turning into a grin. I've come to challenge you. It's been centuries since we last fought. Let us shake the heavens with our fists one more time. Naruto wanted to groan. We are not fighting in the middle of New York. The answer he got was another laugh from the god of thunder, and watched as he jumped high in the air with his hammer held high. He meant to crush it into the blonde's skull, but instead found himself getting drop-kicked square in the chest and force higher into the air. In the blink of an eye, Naruto landed and pushed himself back into the air and grabbed Thor before his body could exit the alleyway. When they landed, Naruto didn't give Thor a chance to act and promptly dragged him over to the nearby trash can and threw him inside. He threw the lid down with a loud, resounding echo and flashed away with the bin and Thor in tow. A bitter chill ran across his face as he landed on the steep mountainside of the Matterhorn in Switzerland. This would do for the time being. As I said, you idiot. We're not fighting. I like New York. I'm not leveling another city with you. He blinked away, leaving the god of thunder groaning inside the bin as he tried to gather his bearings. Naruto flashed back again, twice. We did that twice. He flashed away again, returning to the Fox's Den to hurry his customers home and abruptly close his business for the evening. This was not how his day was meant to end.